Welcome to chapter 14 of Pride and Prejudice. It opens with the dinner with Mr. Collins and Mr. Bennet having stayed silent during most of it until the food was removed and finally deemed ready to engage in conversation with their guest, and jumps on a conversation that he decides would probably allow Mr. Collins to shine, aka talking about his patroness, Lady Catherine de Bourgh. But the thing I'm going to talk about here is the thought I had while reading that line, which is Jane and Lizzie's future husband and the relationship it is to their father. Because during this, Mr. Bennet is rather silent during this dinner, not engaging with his guest, because technically it's his guest. He sent a letter to Mr. Bennet, and Mr. Bennet responded. It's not Mrs. Bennet's guest, it's none of the girls' guests, it's his specifically, but yet his wife and daughters have to carry the brunt of engaging and entertaining him during this dinner. But at the same time, it doesn't wave a flag to you on first impression, or at least for most of us, because of how the patriarchy and like masculinity works in our society for many, many years. Case in point, a lot of the romantic love interests are like strong men portrayed in many forms of media are often the quiet stoic type, and that's kind of what Mr. Bennet is portraying. And also, like, people would be like, well, it's the wife and daughter's jobs anyway to entertain, they are the hostesses. But still, it's like he's putting the brunt of the work on the girls in his family, which there's a lot you could dig into that. But getting back to what I was just saying about his two eldest daughters' future husbands, because Jane actually picks someone complete opposite. While Mr. Bennet is very quiet, very reserved, often observing people if he is in the room at all, many times he is not in the room at all. But Jane then marries someone who is the complete opposite. She marries someone that is very social, very animated, very talkative, and engaging. And Lizzie, meanwhile, marries someone that is stoic, very quiet, often does not want to be in the room, but she is critical of him initially. And so is Jane, not of Darcy, but of their father. Both of them are critical of their father. Later in this book, we're going to see a very short conversation between these two eldest daughters, softly critiquing their father in his ways, and especially in the way that he primed them to be against their mother and how unfair it kind of is. And while they both love their father and kind of want to please him and earn his respect and being poised and educated, they simultaneously critique him and see his flaws. And I think it's fascinating that Jane marries someone opposite of it, recognizing his flaws and going, I don't want that at all in my life. Whereas Lizzie marries someone very similar. And we do see that Lizzie loves her father a lot more than I think Jane does. Jane just is very free with her love of everyone. I think she's frustrated with both her mother and father in equal terms to loving them, whereas Lizzie does have a favorite and marries someone like that, but also is critical of him. And it's the same thing that she's critical of her father for. So there's a lot more you can dig in with there, but I just wanted to put it to your attention because, like, something about that moment just made me connect those dots. As I previously mentioned, the conversation that Mr. Bennet starts with Mr. Collins, which I don't feel like he's engaging in, he's just kind of setting him up and like, and this, and letting him just run with it, which is Catherine de Bourgh. And it follows with saying that Lady Catherine de Bourgh's attention to his wishes and consideration for his comfort appeared to be very remarkable. Mr. Bennet could not have chosen better. Mr. Collins was eloquent in her praise. This subject elevated him to more than usual solemnity of manner, and with a most important aspect, he protested that he had never in his life witnessed such behavior in a person of rank, such affability and condescension as he had himself experienced from Lady Catherine. And it goes on and on, obviously, to emulate Mr. Collins' conversation without getting too into nitty gritty and boring us. But there's a couple of things that we can pick at here. One, Mr. Bennet recognizing that maybe the conversation was lulling and directed it here. Another thing is realizing from the letter that this might be a pertinent avenue and already gaining enough information from his conversation with his wife and daughters previously, but now let's direct it here and see what kind of person he is. And we are gaining something from here, which is like kind of a false first impression of himself and Lady Catherine de Bourgh, which again, this book was initially titled First Impression. And it's not just the first impression of Lizzie and Darcy with one another, it's the first impression everyone has with each other, with the readers to them. And so in this case, our first impression of Mr. Collins is one way, being not very attractive and very priest like and sermonizes to them. But then we see that he is eloquent in his praise, that he is respectful to women in this sense. Like there is a woman that he is respectable about and idolizes, and maybe he could idolize his wife in that way. And wouldn't that be very loving in one manner that could make potentially a good husband? No, not really. As we will find out, it just means that you're pretty much you're in a relationship with your husband and your husband's other wife, which is Catherine de Bourgh, pretty much like you're in a threesome. Um, but it's also showing like him praising and having a good manners to him. And I guess it depends on also how you see status in society, because the other thing that you should be able to garner slowly is that he is a sycophant of class and status, and that he will kiss ass to rise, and or at least be within the vicinity, and thinks himself even higher than he actually is, just being within the vicinity, that he actually wants to rise socially and is trying to. And very obviously, even though he thinks he's being very sly about it, he's very obvious about it. But the other first impression that we get is with Catherine de Bourgh. She seems like an amazing woman who is a widow and so gracious and doing so many charitable things. But then when we actually meet her with Lizzie, we see that she is very proud and is very surface level. While she is doing these good things, she also does it to make herself look good. She talks about her charitable works, which then goes into, is it really doing a good thing if you need to be praised for it? And that whole conversation you could have, but also like Catherine de Bourgh being very thoughtful of looks. She wants to look like a very gracious status lady, so a leader of her community, helping others, and looks comes down to then even who her nephew marries. So there's a lot to pick at here, but again, getting back to the first impression part. And like I said, this book was initially titled First Impressions. So connecting what I just said about Catherine de Bourgh and Mr. Collins and all that, we see it furthered with his comments, with it saying that she had also asked him twice to dine at Rosings, and had sent for him only the Saturday before to make her proposal of college rail in the evening. Lady Catherine was reckoned proud by many people he knew, but he had never seen anything but affability in her. She had always spoken to him as she would to any other gentleman. She made not the smallest objection to him joining in the society of the neighborhood, nor his leaving the parish occasionally for a week or two to visit his relations. She even condescended to advise him to marry as soon as he could. And there's a lot to dig into this. One is, again, his sycophants of rising in status. And I think it's hard because we're not getting a direct quote, so you can't quite tell what is the author choosing her words wisely, or if it's Mr. Collins almost stupidly revealing the truth, the underlying truth of the situation, which is like that she is condescending to give him advice, that she's talking down to him, giving him advice. A man that is not related to her nor had asked for her advice, but he takes it willingly and loves it. Who knows why? But also that, like, she allows him to dine at Rosings, and how gracious of her to allow little old me, rising me up, and like talks to me as though I'm any other gentleman, which means that class does kind of matter to her a little bit, that she's doing these things, or at least he notices in a way that like he has to point out to others, and is trying to make himself seem more important than maybe even she's trying to do. And there's just like so many aspects of this. Like I said, I don't know if it's Mr. Collins stupidly revealing the truth of the situation, or if it's Jane Austen perfectly picking the right words, such as condescending. And so she's subtly showing the reader the truth. As I previously said, the way that Mr. Collins is presenting Lady Catherine de Bourgh and her daughter will prove later to be humorously not true. He's painting them in a much better light to a point that, like, he's giving a false first impression to the Bennet family. As, Mrs. Bennet is saying, that is all very proper and civil, I am sure, and I dare say she is a very agreeable woman. It is a pity that great ladies in general are not more like her. And there's a lot of like smaller kind of conversations being had here about class and social standing and expectations. For instance, it's not unsurprising that someone of a higher class might be ruder, but at the same time, because you would think that they should be, there's this idealized version of how they should act and interact with others. But at the same time, we're seeing that they're kind of given more leniency, that they're painted in a more attractive and forgiving light than someone that is not of their standing or of their wealth. And like, he's Mr. Collins is a very much a sycophant, so it's worse. But we see this with a lot of Jane Austen characters. We see this with God, why do I keep forgetting his character's name? And Emma, the rector, the priest. I am blanking on his name, but like we see it also with the case of Mr. Wickham here, and we see it with Willoughby. Like, even though he has feelings potentially for Marianne, he marries someone else for her money, and maybe not as attractive. And you see this time and time again for money or status and things like that. And even like, it's not just Jane Austen stories, you see in many others being published of that time. For instance, my favorite, Evelina by Frances Burney, she is extremely beautiful. That's how she's being painted. But her downfall is that you don't quite know her class standing. She's an orphan and she does not have a lot of money. So her prospects don't seem like they should be as good. And when she does end up with Lord Orville, it feels like a Cinderella story because she's going from rags to riches in essence. She's going from nothing to something. The class that he saw something good in her worthy of this, despite the fact that she is not of his class or of his wealth. And you see it today in stories, especially historical fictions. A lot of these stories are similar of this class disparity and what that has to do and say. And there's so much nuance to it, as we see even here in Pride and Prejudice, that technically Mrs. Bennet climbed in status, but she wants her daughters to climb higher and have a more secured future. Would they have a secured future? Well, as you see with Persuasion, even though the family is of a class standing, the father being a baron, their wealth is practically gone, so it's not secure. So there's a lot going on here, but at its core, this is setting up what the initial title of this book is, which is First Impressions, and Mr. Collins is giving this very warped first impression, and it's kind of painting how easily our first impressions can be wrong once you actually get to know someone. Even if it's you met the person the first time, you could be wrong, in case in point with Lizzie and Mr. Darcy. As I also mentioned previously, Mr. Collins kind of puts his foot in his mouth and kind of reveals a lot more about himself than he thinks he is, because he thinks he's smarter than he is. Case in point here, where he says that I am happy on every occasion to offer these little delicate compliments, which are always acceptable to ladies. I have more than once observed to Lady Catherine that her charming daughter seemed born to be a duchess, and that the most elevated rank, instead of giving her consequence, would be adorned by her. These are the kind of little things which please her ladyship, and it is sort of attention which I conceive myself peculiarly bound to pay. He he thinks that he's presenting himself in a good light. He thinks that he's like, look, I am very kind to the young ladies, giving compliments, but you're seeing it as a farce. He doesn't realize that he's revealing the farce, that it is not genuine. It is practice. It is hollow, the words that he is giving. He does not genuinely mean it. And that is what he is. He is a mask of what he wants to be or thinks he is, but not genuine. He might be a priest or a rector, but he does not genuinely believe in the ward or his duties. He does it for the prestige, the front-facing appearance of it. And even then, he's still trying to climb higher. Like, it's just a stepping stone for him. So he's a hollow being himself, and he's revealing it here. And then, obviously, I love that Mr. Bennet calls him out, saying, you judge very properly, and it is happy for you that you possess the talent and flattery of delicacy, which I think he's saying ironically, like, oh, you possess the talent of flattery with delicacy, because there's no delicacy here, is kind of like, he really loads it on hard, and you can see it's like one of those kind of people. But Mr. Bennet then says, may I ask whether these pleasing intentions proceed from the impulse of the moment, or are they the result of previous study? They arise chiefly from what is passing at the time, and though I am sometimes amused myself with suggesting arranging such little elegant compliments as may be adapted to ordinary occasions, I always wish to give them an unstudied an air as possible. Okay, Mr. Bennet has caught on, has noticed that he has ratted himself out, that he is a hollow man, that is a practiced thing, which, like, flirting, there's an awkwardness to it, but what he's, and like, not everyone is witty as, say, some others, or good with their words, but him pronouncing this as though it is a good trait is showing that he thinks it is. That he thinks, like, look, look at me, I am very good with my words. I am a suave man. I offer compliments, and he thinks about them. And it's a manipulation kind of thing. Like, he's thinking of how to manipulate the woman with these little compliments that he perfectly arranges, but sometimes he's on the spur of the moment, but it's never genuine. And Mr. Bennet is realizing this, and in part calling him out, because he's like, this man thinks very highly of himself. Let me bring him down a little bit in a sly way, but also I think trying to call attention to his family, being like, you may not want to be aligned with this man. He is very full of himself and very hollow, or at least be warned what kind of man that you would be potentially aligning yourself with. So he's not outright banning his daughters. He's trying to subtly put a light on this man's flaws while simultaneously bringing him down. But Mr. Collins is so full of himself that he does not see that. This scene between Mr. Collins and Lydia is one that I think about often, and I don't know exactly why it's one of the first scenes that pops in my mind when I think of Pride and Prejudice, but it is, and I think it's because it's funny, but also there's a lot that it says, which it's the moment when Mr. Collins opens up Fordyce's sermon, and already Lydia's like, oh no. But then he barely gets 3 pages in, reading in a very monotonous, solemn tone. She interrupts him to then share gossip, talking about their Uncle Philip turning away Richard, and Mr. Colonel Foster possibly taking him on, and all these things. And what this shows us, I think, is a couple different things. One, with Lydia, is showing us a little bit about Lydia and a conversation that could be had, which is, she is someone that cannot sit there quietly, even if to be courteous to a guest. She cannot endure this. And in part, I think it's because she's the youngest, but also she's indulged, as we will have already seen and will continue to see. But also, I think it's a conversation of the time, which is Lydia capturing, in essence, wild youthfulness, which I think every generation always complains about, the youth going above and beyond and being too wild. And Fordyce's sermon, as I previously mentioned, is a text written to be kind of a manners guide, and it's very puritanistic, I think, in sentiment, but and very against the opposite what Lydia is, which is to have fun and gamble and drink and dance and have no worries or concerns, which at this time you're hearing stories of young men going to London and drinking and gambling and all these things and horse racing and stuff like that. You don't see it as much in Georgia. I mean, in Jane Austen stories, you see a little bit more in Georgia Harris stories, and she's did a good deal of research before writing and captures a good sense of the era. But Jane Austen doesn't talk about it a lot, but she's also not in the city center with more of the rich, more of the lazy. She's still existing in the country, but you see essence of it in some of her characters, like Frank Churchill and Henry Crawford. They capture kind of that a little bit, but like also Lydia and Wickham. And I think it's like, I just love, because this moment beautifully captures this conversation to have, not only about indulging youth, in the sense of Lydia, but like just the upbringing of Lydia, of like you not caring enough, you're gonna have a child like that, which is still a relevant conversation today, a conversation we're having today about parents that give their kids iPads and don't teach them like right from wrong per se, or how to interact with others, or how to be a part of a community, and how to be courteous, and that sometimes you have to be discomfort to exist with others, kind of thing. Like I just saw a TikTok video, a story of this young mom seeing a group of young boys kind of terrorizing a duck, and the parents followed idly by. And when this creator and their mother said, like, hey, you should leave the ducks alone, the mother of the young boy said, oh, don't worry, the duck, I'm with them, the ducks won't hurt them. And it's like, no, I'm worried about the ducks. Like, they shouldn't be terrorizing other creatures like this. And I think this is a similar conversation. So what I'm getting at is that this is a conversation that we've had obviously for centuries, and this is the beauty of reading something like this, which is contemporary of its time, which, while the points of what is happening is different, the core essence of the problem still exists, which is parenting and overindulgence. But Lydia is only one part of this scene that I find fascinating. Mr. Collins is the other part. So when she interrupts him, he then Lydia was bid by her two eldest sisters to hold her tongue, but Mr. Collins, much offended, laid aside his book and said, I have often observed how little young ladies are interested by books of a serious stamp, though written solely for their benefit. It amazes me, I confess, for certainly there can be nothing so advantageous to them as instruction, but I will no longer importune my young cousin. And first, we see it comes down to the eldest sisters to try to parent their younger sister, and as I previously said, she's indulged the tiredness of maybe having too many kids. And this is a conversation I've heard on like TikTok of people coming from a family with many kids, the lack of parenting, and then depending on oldest kids to do it. But that's a different conversation for a different time. Getting back to Mr. Collins, it's a very I think it captures perfectly him, which he thinks he's clever and thinks he's very good with his words, but he's not. It's very blunt. And he is bluntly critiquing Lydia, but he thinks he's being very suave about it. And that's like every aspect of his life. He thinks he's very witty, very suave, but it's very opaque what he's trying to do. Case in point with the compliment situation that was previously mentioned. But in this case, he's critiquing Lydia and thinking he has the place to do that, which then has a conversation of like who has a place to kind of raise kids, teach morals and stuff. And something like Mr. Collins in theory should, as a kind of family member, technically a cousin, and also as a man of the cloth, kind of like this is, a priest and such are talking about morality often in their sermons and stuff. But it's an interesting situation because he is a newcomer and he technically holds their lives in his hand, as he is destined to inherit their house. And, the girls outliving their father, and if they're not married and well settled, they might have to be dependent on him. So then you have awkward power dynamics. But the other thing is that what he says perfectly captures what Fordyce's sermon is, which is it's lecturing of how young ladies and young men should act in a very kind of dry manner. And it's funny to me that like he's vocalizing this but then doesn't embody it himself, and just him critiquing is frustrating. And I think that's a part of the reason why I love this scene, because he's exactly the kind of guy like you still see today. Another case in point of like, while this was written in 1800s, well technically I think the late 1700s, but published in I think 1805, was it? I'm pulling this from the recesses of my mind, but what I'm trying to get at is that this type of man still exists today. This is another case in point that despite the 200-year difference, these type of men still exist today, that we still have guys that sermonize and try to dictate how women should act and dress and be, but they themselves are part of the problem, kind of thing. So again, the problem still exists centuries later. It comes out, it's painted with slightly different colors per se, but the painting is still the same, is what I'm trying to get at. So yeah, you have this bit of awkwardness that Mr. Bennet then has to step in and offer to play backgammon with Mr. Collins, but I also like with backgammon in the terms Mr. Bennet offered himself as the antagonist, which is fascinating because Mr. Collins in the situation is the antagonist in the sense of the words, but in Lizzie's story a little bit. But yeah, I think there's more I can unpack there, and I just can't quite scrape it just yet this early in the day. But that is the end of the chapter. We're seeing that Mr. Collins is, I think we saw the true side of him in this scene, the real version of him, the wanting to dictate young women, having a very specific type of young woman, and thinks that he is smarter than he is, wittier than he is, but is not actually as good with his words as he thinks. And then later says, but Mr. Collins, after assuring that he bore his young cousin no ill will and should never resent her behavior as any affront, doesn't stand by his word. He says whatever needs to be said in the moment and doesn't truly speak truthfully, doesn't truly stand by it. And he's just a kiss ass, and I love him for it. I love that he is just, bugs you just enough. He just pinches at your arm fat just enough that it's annoying. But I can't imagine a story about him, because then you wouldn't be having these great conversations. So yeah, that's the end of chapter 14.